الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الكريم وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Continuing in our lessons on Usul Fiqh, last week we looked at the adillah, the evidences upon which the fiqh, right, the furu' al-fiqhiyya, the subsidiary issues of fiqh are based on. And we said that they divide into two categories. We did last week the Quran and Sunnah. And this week we'll look at ijma' and qiyas, inshallah ta'ala, if time permits. And what's important about these lessons is to understand what are the evidences which are acceptable. And these four which we said are agreed upon. But there are some details in terms of what areas within them can there be a scope of differing. And then the adillah al-mukhtalafu fiha, the evidences which scholars differ over. Those ones, inshallah ta'ala, if we have time, we'll go over them one by one and how they're used. And what's important to understand from this is that when there's an evidence, someone has an evidence, that it means they can take from that evidence, they can use to derive something, to derive the hukm. So we always have to pay attention to each one of these issues, that why we're studying them, how they work. So the first study we did, we looked at the person who's mukallaf, who's the person who's legally responsible. Then we did the ahkam taklifiyya, the 5 rulings upon which we make a judgment. What is something is obligatory, is it recommended, etc. So these rulings. And now we're looking at the adillah, the evidences by which we derive, from which we derive these rulings. And later we're going to look at then the methods in which to get the rulings. So essentially Usul al-Fiqh is only 4 categories, 4 chapters really. Right? The first is the muqaddimah regarding the ahkam and all that's related to it, the different types of rulings. Then the adillah, the evidences. Then the dilalat, the indications as to how do you know an evidence is indicating wajib or not. Then ta'arud, when there's difference of opinion and you have to take a stronger opinion or a weaker opinion or difference of opinion. That's the 4th one. So if you understand that, you see that most of what is going on in fiqh, or usul al-fiqh, is to do with not the adillah. Right? Not most of the conversation is not there. It's in the chapter coming, which is to do with the dalalat, the indications from which the scholars differed. Although we'll see in today's lesson, some difference of opinion comes back to the evidences. Not in the 4 we're going to talk about, but how they understood some of them. Okay, so it's very important to know these things, because if you look at usul al-fiqh as just disjoint ideas, it makes no benefit. If you go to fiqh and say, okay, now let's go and use this. And this is why most of the students, they don't like to study, because it's all the ideas are scattered. They're not seeing the big picture. And when it comes to then the application, the deriving of the rulings, everything they learned became lost. They forgot it. Or they can't see how you went from here to here. So it's good to always have that overview, the big picture, so you can remind yourself. So now we're going to look at al-ijma' wal-qiyas. We start with al-ijma', the consensus. And these 2 types of evidences, al-ijma' wal-qiyas, the ulama, they call them subsidiary evidences, in the sense that they both are dependent on the Quran and Sunnah. That's the first benefit. The Quran and Sunnah are the official evidences, because the wahyain, these are the 2 sources of revelation. Al-ijma' comes from the Quran and Sunnah, and qiyas in the absence of the Quran and Sunnah. Remember that. There's no qiyas amam nas. It's when there's an absence of text. Or maybe there is a text but it's not necessarily the clearest to be used, or dispute about authenticity, or dispute, they might go to qiyas. But the general rule is ijma', consensus, is based on the Quran and Sunnah. While qiyas, analogy, is used when there's no Quran and Sunnah. Okay, understand, that's what Quran and Sunnah is the hujjah. The rest are far'iyyan, they're considered subsidiary. And the reason why it's important to know that is because you can't pit these two evidences against the actual evidences. The Quran and Sunnah are the evidences. The other 2 are forms of evidence derived from these 2. With that being said, what is meant by consensus? So the term we're using here, al-ijma', consensus, the scholars, they say al-ijma' just means linguistically azm wal-mu'akkad, something which has been resolved or been emphasized. But when we use it in the Islamic terminology, usul al-fiqh, اتفاق المجتهدي الأمة الإسلامية في عصر من عصور الحكم الشرعي. It is the agreement of the jurists, or the agreement of the mujtahidun. Mujtahid al-ummah means the people who are able to do ijtihad, to make it easy, the ulama who can do ijtihad, who can do juristic reasoning to derive at the ruling. These are called the mujtahidun. When they agree in the Islamic Ummah, in an era from the eras of Islam, any era, if these mujtahidun agree on a hukm shar'i, on a legislative ruling, then it becomes ijma', consensus. So an example would be that the Sahaba, the companions of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, all agreed to the validity of compiling the Mus'haf, the Quran, in one copy. That's considered ijma' al-Sahaba. Why? Because when Uthman, first Abu Bakr decided it, and they all agreed. Then Uthman did it, they all agreed. Right? So the claim that Ibn Mas'ud had different Mus'haf, ijma' al-Sahaba. What are you talking about? It's a different Mus'haf. Right? This kind of speech is strange sometimes. What, he didn't agree to the ijma' of Ibn Mas'ud? Ibn Abi Dawud, he said, yes, Ibn Mas'ud also agreed to the ijma' al-Sahaba. So there is a question we're going to say then. If the Sahaba agree that the Quran should be compiled one book, why is it called ijma'? All the Sahaba. So one time period, Asim al-Usur, so the time of Sahaba, Mujtahid al-Ummah, so not everybody, but the ulama and the Mujtahidun, so Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali, all the ulama, scholars who can do ijtihad, they all agreed that compiling the Mus'haf to one copy is something good. Hukm shar'i is permissible. As for the ijma' al-awam and the others, doesn't count. Commoners on ahl ijtihad. So we don't count them as part of the ijma'. So what is ijma' consensus? The agreement of the mujtahidun, those who can do independent juristic efforts to reach a ruling. We'll talk about later ijtihad. Those who can derive rulings, they're called mujtahidun. When those scholars or those people agree in the Islamic ummah in any time period of Islam on a particular Islamic ruling, then it becomes a consensus. So underneath ijma' then are a number of masail. We'll try to summarize them, make them easy to understand. First issue that arises, what's the validity in the proof? The hujjiyya to ijma', al-ijma'. How strong of evidence is ijma'? Scholars say the consensus is considered as evidence in Islam. A consensus is an evidence in Islam. Hence, you cannot oppose it. Means if all the scholars of a particular era agree to a particular ruling, it is not permissible for anyone to differ with them. قال الله تعالى ومن يشاقق الرسول من بعد ما تبين له الهدى ويتبع غير سبيل المؤمنين نوله ما تولى ونصله جهنم وساءت مصيره. Chapter 4, Surah Nisa, Ayah 115. So Allah says, whomsoever opposes the messenger after guidance is made clear to them and follows a path other than the path of the believers. Sabil, Allah says, غير سبيل المؤمنين. Mu'mineen here means Sahaba. This is the ayah. So Allah says, whoever does opposes them and opposes Rasul's guidance, we leave them to what they have chosen, and their pathway is Jahannam, and how evil of a destination it is. The benefit we take from this ayah, who derived this ayah to be ijma'? Imam Shafi'i. In the narration authentically reported from him, that a man asked him, where in the Quran is ijma', consensus? So he told him, I give you 3 days to find it. So Shafi'i spent 3 days, day and night and day, to find this, and he found the ayah. This ayah, he said, I found it. غير سبيل المؤمنين. Allah said, whoever opposes the Messenger ﷺ and the way of the Sahaba. Why Allah added that part? Why not whoever opposes the Messenger ﷺ goes to Jahannam? غير سبيل المؤمنين means their path, ijma' Sahaba. They go to Jahannam. Hence showing that opposing the consensus, if it leads us to the hellfire, and here the believers refers to the Sahaba specifically, but mu'mineen in general refers to all the believers, and more specifically scholars amongst them. Therefore, consensus must be an Islamic ruling. It must be. So now we benefit amongst many evidences. There's also a hadith as well, but we'll suffice with this. That consensus is considered evidence. And most of the ummah agree. And ijma' consensus is based on the Quran and Sunnah. And how do the ulama derive it? They say, إِذَا ثَبَتَ بِالْإِسْتِقْرَاءِ أَنَّ جَمِيعَ الْإِجْمَاعَاتِ مَنْصُوصَةً. They learn that by looking at every single consensus declared in the ummah, if you follow that up, you'll find the evidence in the Quran and Sunnah for it. So there's no such thing as ijma' consensus in the air. It can't be floating by itself. It can't be without foundation. Now, sometimes you hear consensus, but there's no proof. Or you can't find strength. And that's why there's a difference between a real ijma' and a claimed ijma'. Some ijma'at are claimed. They can't prove it. Because we know that the ijma', in order to be really, and we're going to see categories of it, once it's affirmed, it's necessarily based on the Quran and Sunnah. It must be. Because ijma' is a report. It's a report about the fact that this ruling is agreed upon. Remember, something that the ulama agreed upon. They cannot agree upon batil, falsehood, and they can't agree upon something not in the Quran and Sunnah, because hukmullah, they're talking about Allah's ruling. So if the ulama all agreed khamr, alcohol or intoxicants are prohibited in Islam, ijma' ulama. Now someone say, where did they get that from? Well, look, all the nusus, ayah, hadith, some of the ayat, hadith, all those evidence that prove it's haram, and therefore the scholars, when they agreed upon it, it's impossible. If it's a real consensus, meaning not one that was claimed or erroneously, or it was a majority view, not a minority. I'm talking about absolute ijma', as we'll see the categories in a second. When there's a real ijma', it's impossible to oppose the Quran and Sunnah, and it's impossible to be wrong. Very important. We have to understand the trustworthiness of the deen. If the ulama claim ijma' is something and it's proven, it's impossible it's wrong. Impossible. Because Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, Inna hadi umma la tajtami'u ala batil abadan. This ummah never agrees about falsehood, ever. And the reason I'm saying that, because there's people nowadays, they may say, how do you know? Ya Shaykh, ijma' ulama, wal uqala, what do you expect? The ulama agree to something. What do you think, someone is going to come better than them and say otherwise? It's impossible. I know in today's time, it's like everything's up in the air. Because we're talking about awam. Awam are outside the conversation. For them, there's no ijma' wala shay. That's all ara wala ahwa. They're just in their own world. So if someone today says, for example, the Quran is a speech of Allah, ijma' ulama, the Quran came to us. Don't be shocked. Nobody going to bring it. Nobody. Not some kafir in some university or some guy on YouTube. Nobody's going to bring a doubt. Nobody. You have to understand what ijma' means. This is no joke. And some ulama, when they call ijma', just let it go. It's ijma'. Like some ulama said, Shaykh Ibn Taymiyyah, when he said ijma' or he said something about the deen, like this bab al-Istiqama, he went to the whole, there's nothing left. He looked through it. That's how big these scholars are. And I think sometimes we forget that. Aren't ulama, some of them by themselves? Like just the other day I was listening to the biography of Alamat al-Shinqiti, rahimahullah, Muhammad Amin al-Shinqiti, they said, if Imam Shinqiti doesn't know something in Arabic language, it's not in Arabic. If he says, I don't know, khalas, it's not in the language. Because he knows all of it. That's how knowledgeable he was. Imagine, brothers, that much knowledge. He said, I don't know. One sheikh said, he said, La adri, khalas, leave it alone. You're not going to find it. Right? And this is the kind of trustworthiness we should have with our ulama, because you're never going to see people like this. Ayat min ayatillah. Your ayat, these ulama. So when they imagine the whole ummah of them came together. Shaykh, it's finished. That's it. So that gives us something to be happy about, because when there is ijma', confidence. But if there is no ijma', then they can explain why there's difference of opinion. And that leads us to another point now, the levels of ijma'. And what does it mean if someone opposes ijma'? So scholars say if someone opposes ijma', this is a serious issue. But there's two things we have to understand here. Opposing ijma', we just said, is not permissible, for Allah threatened the people with hellfire if they opposed it. But what does it mean to oppose the ijma'? The scholars, they say, the one who opposes the ijma' is one of two affairs. Number one, he opposed a clear-cut ijma', which has been reported to us in successive mutawatir chains of transmission. In this case, this will be kufr, disbelief, because he's belying the truth of the religion. Because remember, what is ijma'? Ijma' is a report of these great scholars that this thing is halal or haram, for example. If I come and say this is not haram, after the whole ummah said it's halal, or I say it's halal and the whole ummah says haram, and it's something which is clearly, successively transmitted, absolutely clear, this is kufr. Because it's tantamount to disbelieving the Quran and Sunnah. Because where does ijma' come from again? The Quran and Sunnah. It's tantamount to the same thing. It's saying the same thing. It's like denying one harf of the Quran, one letter. That's disbelief, especially if someone has no excuse to not ignorant or anything. The second thing, if someone opposes something else of a consensus, which is not clear-cut, or it's not mutawatir, it's not like successively reported, then in this case, scholars say this person is sinful, right, for opposing, right, the ijma' which was mentioned or stated, not disbeliever, because that ijma' could be, as we see, dhanni, not qat'i. It could be a speculative consensus, as we'll see in a second. So what do we learn from this? No one should oppose consensus. But in the cases where there is an opposition, it must be one of two things. Either the consensus is not correct, the claim of the consensus must not be correct, or the scholars who differ with it, there must have been someone who differed with them earlier, hence it's not a consensus issue. Scholars don't oppose ijma'at. They don't. But sometimes what you'll find is someone will say it's ijma' and it's not actually ijma'. Hence, it's a difference of opinion. So that's why when you notice, if there's a claim for ijma', then you see a difference of opinion, what will be the solution? That whoever claimed the consensus must not be correct maybe in his claim. Otherwise, the scholars who differ will not be able to differ. So what we're going to learn here, that if ever there's a real ijma', there is no khilaf. Ikhtilaf only exists when there is no ijma'. Right? Because ijma' is based on what? Something absolutely clear-cut. Like is the ikhtilaf in alcohol being prohibited, or zina, or salah, 5 salah being wajib. It's no ikhtilaf. But when you look at many of the issues where there is ikhtilaf, we're going to notice that the absence of the ijtihad. Ikhtilaf, ijma'. Consensus is missing, hence there was difference of opinion. Another issue. What is meant by a period from the periods of Islam? Scholars say when the scholars who made a consensus, do they have to die, all of them, so that the consensus becomes firm or valid or not? The most correct opinion is not a condition that the scholars die or all the scholars in the era pass away before the consensus is enacted. Inqirad al-Asr means, do we have to wait for every scholar to die before we claim the ijma'? No. As soon as they claim it, for ijma'. So in today's time, for example, all the big fiqh councils, they make ijma' all the time on something, or particular issues. If they make ijma' on a particular mas'ala of the contemporary issues, khalas, they don't have to wait for the ulama to die. Ijma' is called, because what is ijma' again? The agreement of all the jurists who are mujtahidun, or the ulama who are mujtahidun, they agreed in a time period. That's it. You don't have to wait for their death. It's not a condition. That makes it easier, because if we say that we have to wait, then then it becomes issue where we're going to have less ijma', or not possible to have ijma', because we're going to have to see if everyone dies. And also the scholars, they mention that if there is a change in the ijma' or the ruling, then that's something else also in terms of going back on the rulings. That's a different discussion. Now, with that being said, we move on to another issue. There's types of ijma', types of consensus, and so we'll mention some of them so we can understand how the consensus works. Scholars, they say that the types of ijma', anwa'ul ijma', the types of consensus, and this is usually considered 3 types, and the difference between these 3 types is in difference in strength. Number 1, al-ijma'u sarih. Ijma'u sarih, clear, explicit consensus. What is this one? ما صرح فيه أهل الإجماع بحكم. When a whole group of scholars explicitly declare the consensus. This is very difficult, right, to find. Why? Because it requires all the jurists to declare openly or together that we agree. Maybe in today's time when we have like Muslim fiqh bodies, it's possible to do something like this. But in the past, imagine all the scholars of every range agreed. Clearly, they said, I agree. That's very hard, right, to find. But this is the strongest one. Number 2, al-ijma'u sukuti, the silent consensus. And this is when there is no clear, explicit statement from the scholars, each one of them, that they agreed to this particular ruling. However, some of them have vocalized it and the others were silent. So let's say a group of scholars said that this is haram and nobody differed with them. Those who make it explicit, they made tasrih, they said openly. And those who were silent were quiet. So can we say that they all agree, or must we look for everybody's statement? We say it all counts. Ijma' al-sukuti is hujjah. It counts because is it permissible for a scholar to be quiet about a mistake? Not permissible. So imagine there's a ruling amongst their fellow brothers who said something's halal and it's actually not halal, and everyone just keeps quiet. They're all sinful then. Ulama are taqwa, they don't keep quiet because that's considered haram. So they speak up if it's wrong and they would differ. But if they all agreed, right, or they kept quiet, because the ulama, if someone speaks on their behalf on the ruling and passes it for the people, then they can agree to it. Their mas'uliyah is also been sufficed, means that the person has the kifayah for them. He made it clear the ruling. Hence you find some of the scholars, they might not make something clear, another group of scholars did it for them. And they didn't differ. So the benefit behind ijma' al-sukuti, the silent consensus, most ijma'at are silent. Because this is what Imam Ahmad was talking about. When he said whoever claims ijma' is lying, this is what he's talking about. Ijma' al-sarih, it's very hard. If you claim ijma' al-sarih for every alim, this is kadhib. Ijma' al-sukuti, the silent one, then yes, it's possible. Because remember, that time the ummah spread, now it's huge. So we rely upon the silent consensus. Why? Because with the internet and everything, the knowledge of past, no one can, they said something. But the problem we have today is that if someone says, no, this is not ijma', it is ijma', but its level is a little bit weaker, as we'll see in a second. And the third category, al-ijma'u dimni, ضمني, right, which means an inclusive consensus or consensus of inclusivity. Al-Dimni means what is intended here is that if the scholars and at a time period in Islam, al-Ijma' al-Dimni, what it means is that the ulama in a time period, let's say, differed on two opinions or more. Let's say they differ on ruling, ruling A, ruling B. Then these two rulings are the possible consensus, possible rulings available for this thing. It could be, let's say, the ulama differed, something's wajib or mustahab, recommended or obligatory. So what's going on now? The ulama who are the mujtahidun agreed that something either wajib or mustahab. No one says mubah. So what will be then that the statements here, we all have to agree that this ruling can only be wajib or mustahab. We don't have two choices. So if it's a difference now, where the parameters of difference of opinion is made by who? The mujtahidun. So an example, Salatul Eid. The Eid prayer, it's either obligatory or recommended. I don't hear makruh, right? Right? So imagine time someone comes and say it could be makruh. No, it's dimni. What do you mean? It's only two choices. No alim ever said otherwise. So we're bound by their consensus. This is a consensus, type of consensus in the parameters of the discussion. But today, brothers, we're signing online. Min ajaib, people coming and talking about masail. No one knows where they're getting it from. It's already like this. Something we're going to talk about in a second. You can't make up new opinions without conditions. Some people kind of come by ijtihad. He just goes against everybody else. Yeah, Shaykh, ijma' al-dimni. It's only two choices. And it's funny because when you analyze what's going on online today, it makes you laugh, it makes you cry. People don't even know the parameters of what his aql is telling him. Yeah, Shaykh, there's only two views. Ihdath al-qawl al-thalith, to make a new opinion has shurut. And you're just coming here with an opinion out of nowhere. That shows you 100% ignorant, right? But today, here we are. Someone said this. Everyone can say something, brothers. We have to pay attention. We have to know. So the ulama, why did he mention this? Imagine the past scholars differed on an issue between two possible rulings. Where are we left now? Between one of these two rulings. We can differ too on one of these two rulings. So always in the past, if there's one or two or three or four opinions, let's say there's four opinions. Today's time there's going to be four opinions. If in the past there was two opinions on an issue, today's going to be two opinions. That's it. So that's how you can follow the trail, right? You can go, so Shaykh bin Baz, follow his view, he ends up in this madhab. Shaykh bin Mahdi, follow him, he goes in that way, this madhab, because there's only two views. If, for example, now someone says, can we come up with a third view? We're going to see in a second there are conditions and rules and about whether or not you're allowed to do that. So how much categories ijma' are they? 3. One which is clear-cut, explicit, al-ijma' as-sarih, clear, explicit. Number 2, al-ijma' as-sukuti, which is the implicit or the silent consensus. And the third one, ijma' al-dimni, the ijma' of the parameters or the inclusivity or the boundaries of the differing. That's called ijma' al-dimni. Here the ulama then say, depending on the level of consensus, the first two, there's difference between their strength. Al-ijma' al-sarih, the clear-cut, explicit ijma' is qat'i, it's absolutely definitive. Means its ruling is hujjah, it's evidence, and it's very strong. Because it's clear-cut. Because if the ulama all explicitly said something's haram, that means there's no way, two ways about it. It's 100% haram. Whereas ijma' as-sukuti, the one where it's silent or implicit, the evidence, the strength of it, it is proof. What kind of proof? Dhanni. It's speculative. It's weaker. And the only reason why you have to know what dhanni means, you can use it as proof, but it's not as strong as the other one. The reason then would be, sometimes scholars, they differ. If something is ijma', depending on the type of ijma'. Hence, if most of the ijma'at, most consensus is sukuti, implicit, and those are dhanni, that's why some ulama can differ with it. Because what they're claiming is that you said it's ijma', but I found someone who said otherwise. You see, sometimes you can break the ijma' and say, well, it's not ijma' awalan. Here's someone who said otherwise. Because how much does it take to break the ijma'? One of the ulama who mujtahid in that period, who didn't agree with that, who said something against that view, then it's going to be now the areas up for discussion. So some of the ulama have made easy for us when it comes to the issue of ijma', try to make it, all of it is evidence, but at varying degrees. To help us also understand that, some of the scholars say, if the ijma' as-sukuti, let's go back there for a second. We said it's dhanni, speculative. But there is a category amongst it that can be qat'i, if we can say that it's definitive, that nobody differed whatsoever and there's no doubt about it. But in most cases, you might say that it's proof, it's speculative, only because it's possible. The possibility of someone differing is there, But our sharia doesn't make it wajib on us to know these things always 100%. غَلَبَةُ الظَّنِّ, having an overall idea, most likely is sufficient. So the reason we're mentioning this, some scholars, when they talk about ijma' and they mention a silent or implicit ijma', some people say it's not proof, and we say it is proof. But just understand that if it's a type of proof, it might not be as strong as the first one. That doesn't mean you can't use it, you can't claim it. Because if you hear ijma' consensus, you should take it. You should not be hasty and say, no, I don't accept it. No, ijma' is a big deal. It's a big deal. With that being said then, the ulama then, they talk about the third one we said, which is the one where there's parameters. This, the scholars say, al-ijma' al-dimni is evidence. But the question now comes, can you make a third opinion? Are we allowed to establish a third opinion? So the scholars, they say then, some of them you can't. Because if the earlier scholars, they differed on two opinions, you cannot make a third one. Right? So, and also the scholars say because the fact that they differed on two opinions, it means it's a type of ijma' consensus that it cannot be two opinions. But some of our scholars, past and present, they say that you're allowed to make a third opinion with conditions. And the conditions is that as long as it doesn't oppose the two or the other views that came earlier. So for example, Shaykh ibn Uthaymeen says, rahimahullah, if you can invent, you can have a third opinion as long as it doesn't oppose the earlier ones. You didn't make ibtal ijma', you didn't nullify the early ijma'. So for example, one of you says this, one of you says that, you go in the middle. Is that possible? Yes, you could do a detail. In this scenario it's wajib, this scenario is mustahab. I didn't negate the two views, I just went in the middle. That's permissible. Or you came with a third opinion, right, but you put the conditions around it. So the scholars here, they say that that's just. But generally speaking, if the scholars differ on a certain amount of views, we have to stay by it. Because that's what it means to follow the Salaf Salih, the pious predecessors. Because fahm Salaf hujjah, understanding the evidences, the way the Salaf understood is hujjah. So that's why when you study any fiqh issue, you always take a look at what is the differing, how much differing is there. Sometimes it's a wide difference, so you can see it's a very open issue. Sometimes very restricted difference. So now you can see, okay, there's 2 or 3 views. And so today's time, we have to be careful with making up new opinions. And these are issues which are classical. As for no new issues, contemporary issues, nawazil, then that's different. Because there's no precedent. If it's a nawazil, a new issue, there's no precedent of the contemporary time, hence we have to do ijtihad. Here I'm talking about the masail which are originally classical, traditional issues. Like for example, tayammum. We have a parameter of how many issues there are, what the difference are, so we can study it, all of it. But let's say a new issue like Bitcoin, well, the Bitcoin didn't exist in the past, so then there can be ijtihad, and there can be different views amongst the ulama. And again, as you can see, they differed. Also, there's parameters still, because they're also developing views, but that's why we can understand that new issues have special rulings. طيب, one of the issues that comes up is the ijtihad of the people of Medina. Amul Ahl Medina, is it considered ijma' or not? In order to understand this, the scholars, they said, well, what is meant by Ahl Medina, or the people who lived in the Medina, which is the Sahaba, radiyallahu ta'ala anhum. Hence, we could say that Ahl Medina, there's categories. We can't make one ruling. So the best way to understand, Imam Malik in his madhab, he used to often rely on the methodology or the views of the people of Medina. Where Imam Shafi'i, who studied him, didn't accept that in his madhab. Right? So if you look at 2 madhabs, Malik, Amul Ahl Medina is very big in his madhabs, one of his Usul. Imam Shafi'i in his Usul is not there, even though he's a student. The reason why is because they didn't agree with him that all of the actions of people of Medina are hujjah. They didn't agree it's all evidence. So the scholars, they divide into categories. To give us an understanding, let's see the first category. What the people of Medina reported from Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam collectively, no doubt this is hujjah. Example, all the people of Medina, they reported to us how to make adhan. That's ijma', that's a consensus. Or the best example, the sa' wal mud. Today if you go to Medina, you can see the silver cup, right? What's a mud? What's the measuring? And what's the sa'? These are 2 measurements of the past. The people of Medina have kept that preserved. That preservation is hujjah, and it's ijma'. That this is what the size is. Because Ahl Medina, they reported to Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam generation after generation. We accept that. Another example, right, will be the time for salah. Again, they learn from Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam reported. So that's the first category. If it's this kind of consensus, what the people of Medina reported from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that is consensus. That is considered proof. Second level, the consensus of the people of Medina before the death of Uthman or the murder of Uthman radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Because Uthman, after his death, a lot of fitna happened, right? So Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman, and then the death of Uthman came, a lot of trials, tribulation, and the Khilafah of Ali, which was the haqq, but obviously there's a lot of problems there of new groups and issues. Scholars, they say, the consensus of the Sahaba or the people of Medina before the murder of Uthman, according to majority of scholars, is considered ijma'. It's a hujjah. What the people of Medina agreed on. People of Medina we're talking about. So we're talking about Medina. What happened in Medina from time of Bakr? Right, they agreed to. Or Umar, what they agreed to. Until Uthman's death, what he also agreed to. That's considered a type of consensus, according to majority of scholars. And that helps us to understand that when we say the actions of people of Medina, we're not talking about all the Medina from generation to generation. We have to specify. Time of the Sahaba, early time of the Sahaba, late time of the Sahaba, late Tabi'un, like this. The third category is when the people of Medina take a particular opinion in a difference of opinion. So let's say there's a difference of opinion amongst the scholars. Ahlul Medina, the people of Medina are one side, or they narrated one wording of a hadith, or they narrated a particular view. Another opinion narrates a different view. Scholars say it's preferable in this kind of difference of opinion to give way to the people of Medina, only because there's more of the Sahaba and Tabi'un with them. Although again, there's some difference on that, but some of the scholars they say that you can use the people of Medina as a supplementary evidence when there's difference of opinion. That's the third one. If there's difference of opinion and there's two evidences, and people of Medina on one side, another scholars on the other side, you can use this people of Medina to support one of the views. Why? Because who's in Medina again? Sahaba wa tabi'un, atba'u tabi'un. So they have more. There's more of them in Medina than there is in Kufa and Iraq. So that's, some of the scholars say that's a good way to help use it. And the last one is the people of Medina, the latter generation. So this is what Imam Malik usually inclined to a lot to. The latter Ahl Medina, Tabi'un and others. So everything after, right? The murder of Uthman, and later on, here the scholars say the correct opinion is that if we said, is it ijma' or not, the scholars they differ. Some of them, like Imam Malik, others said it is, and others said it's not. And that's more safer to say it's not. The latter group of Medina, what they agreed upon is not ijma'. Why? Because there's also scholars who are like their level in other regions of the Muslim world. So in summary, the consensus, the people of Medina, if it's a Sahaba, agreed to something in terms of reporting from Rasulullah, or their agreements up until the death of Uthman, these are considered consensuses for the most part. As for what happened afterwards, or the latter scholars, then you can use it, right, supplementary evidence, but is it ijma', like the way we said you have to agree upon? It's not necessarily the case. Another question that comes, how about the ijma' of the four khulafa, the four rightly guided caliphs, if they agreed upon something? The correct opinion, it's not considered ijma'. So if Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali all agreed to something, is it ijma'? Right? The ulama say that's not. Even though these are the best ulama, these are four. Why is it not ijma'? Who can answer it? Imagine, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali agreed to something. It's not ijma'? Or the jawab? Four people. Of the ummah, the ba'd al-ummah, not the whole ummah. What is ijma' again? The whole of the asr. Because you can't forget Ibn Mas'ud, Mu'adh bin Jabal, Ibn Umar, other ulama, right? I know that some people, they say, how could you oppose the khulafa? But talking ijma' shaykh is different. It's not saying opposing them. Because if the two sheikhs are on an opinion, or all four sheikhs, there's a big difference. It's a serious opinion. If they all agree upon something. We're just saying, is it consensus? طيب. One of the most common wordings of ijma' you find in the books of fiqh, لا أعلم خلافا. The ulama, when they say, I don't know a difference of opinion. The correct opinion, that's not ijma'. Doesn't count as ijma', because just because a scholar doesn't know, doesn't mean that it is actually a difference of opinion. So some of the ulama say that, I don't know of any scholar who differed. That's not ijma'. Why? Because you could be, according to his knowledge. There could be other scholars say, this is actually ikhtilaf. And some ulama are specialists in ikhtilaf. So they have a lot of the aqwal no one else knows. So that's why there's certain books for ijma' consensus and certain books for ikhtilaf. And sometimes a book will say ijma' and then you go to another book and it's ikhtilaf. So that's why you have to always be, if someone says ijma', you can't just, not that easy, right? You can claim ijma'. So wait, let's go check. An example. Some ulama were easygoing in claiming ijma' and some more strict. An example would be, scholars, they mentioned a scholar Ibn al-Mundhir, rahimahullah, is a great imam, who's a specialist in this difference of opinion, one of the biggest scholars in that field. Also, he's a great scholar when it comes to the issue of ijma'. But when he said something is ijma', scholars say it's not the case because he's a little bit lenient in calling ijma'. So he when difference of opinion, he knows them a lot. When it comes to ikhtilaf, difference of or ijma', he's a little bit lenient. Another example would be, someone or an alim might say something ijma', a consensus, in his madhab. But it's not ijma' for the rest of the madhab. So sometimes you'll say, I don't know the difference of opinion bain ashabina, between our companions. Means of the madhab. Outside the madhab is a different story, Shaykh. It could be difference. So we have to understand something right now, the benefit. Al-ikhtilaf, difference of opinion, can be on two levels. Sometimes in the madhab, and sometimes outside the madhab. So that's what the ulama, when they talk about difference of opinion, just remember, it could be a big difference of opinion between madhabs, then there's different opinion within the madhab. Sometimes when the scholars say, the ijma', this is ijma' fil madhab, Hanbali, Shafi'i, Maliki, or Hanafi. But that doesn't mean between them is not ikhtilaf. See the difference? So sometimes they say that there's difference between the khilafat, difference of opinion. Some are high differences, some are low. The reason I'm saying that you have to know these terminologies, because some may just claim ijma' for a lot of things. And you say, no, it's not the case. And the difference between fiqh and aqeedah, when it comes to ijma' is what? Most of the aqeedah is ijma'at. Whereas fiqh, a lot of it is not ijma'. There's a lot of ijma', but there's more ikhtilaf. And the reason we're going to see later is because there's lots of scope for certain types of differing. That's a summary of ijma' then. All of what we mentioned today, what's the benefit behind it? Ijma' is evidence. You can rely upon it, you should rely upon it. It's based on the Quran and Sunnah. And the benefit behind it is gives surety. Surety that a religion is truth. But now, once we understand this, the Quran and Sunnah, with ijma', no one really differs with ijma', maybe they differ on the fine details. But where the real difference of opinion may come, because now we have to ask the questions. Why is there so much difference of opinion? That's because sometimes there is an absence of evidence. So Quran and Sunnah, with a consensus, Quran and Sunnah are proofs. They're the original evidences, the foundational evidences. Ijma' is a subsidiary evidence. And then in the absence of evidence, we had to resort to the fourth evidence, which is called al-qiyas. Qiyas is called analogy. And analogy is very difficult. If you look at it, it has a lot of different things in it. It can be difficult even to do it. But we have to understand it's just this generality, and you can go and read more about its details. Why is there consensus? Analogy. Why do we even need it? When there is nothing in the Quran and Sunnah clear-cut, right? So it's in terms of explicit ruling, the Quran and Sunnah is so sufficient for us that we can derive rulings from them by way of analogy. And that's again beauty of Islam. Other religions, they have a problem with the explicit text. Forget about implicit evidences. They can't even go there. Because they're making ikhtilaf on the nas. They don't have no nas to begin with. So the Jews and Christians, بَلْهُمْ فِي شَكٍ يَلْعَبُونَ, they're just playing around with the doubts. They don't have no nas. Forget about qiyas, what I say. They're done. They're just sitting there. Us, if you see what the ulama do when it comes to qiyas, brothers, then you'll see the quwwah of ilm. You see the power of ulama. What they can derive, the rulings that they can derive. In a yawm al-qiyamah from the Quran and Sunnah with these rules. And other religions, they look at you and say, Kaif? Hundreds of adillah, istinbatat, evidence is derived from some ayat. And to show you this, not just the books of fiqh, ahkam al-Quran, go to books of aqeedah, you'll see the way the ulama derive. And sometimes, especially in fiqh, because fiqh is where qiyas is used mostly. Aqeedah, there's a very small realm for qiyas. It's not necessary to use it there because we know there are special rules. But ghaib, right? We're talking about fiqh. Fiqh, if you look at the books of fiqh, you see these big books, right? You're wondering, mashallah, how many nusus are there? There are many. We studied in hadith class how many evidence are there. But the amount of the rulings that can be derived from the texts that are available. This gives us the power of Islam. This is why Islam can continue to exist and to be valuable and to be relevant until the Day of Judgment. So to understand qiyas, what does qiyas even mean? Analogy. What is analogy? In the simplest term, to make it very simple, it is when you take a subsidiary ruling, a fara'. Fara' means a ruling that the Sharia didn't talk about. Okay, to make a ruling about something the Sharia didn't explicitly talk about by connecting it to a ruling that the Sharia did talk about. That's the basic, that's it. Something the Sharia was silent about, you connected it to something which the Sharia was explicit about. So it has to do between something which is explicit and something which the Sharia didn't talk about, but we can connect the two because they share in something similarities. So this is why the ulama, when they talk about ijma', just think about something the Quran and Sunnah didn't mention. But the qualities of this thing that we're talking about has shared qualities, something the Quran and Sunnah did talk about. Hence the ulama then will just take the original ruling from that thing and apply it to the new thing. That's qiyas. The problem with qiyas can be that if you overuse it or misuse it. Now you can see that ijma' is useful, but can also be areas of difference of opinion. Because if we're applying it to issues, we may differ on the application, differ on the similarities, differ, and I'm going to explain that how qiyas creates difference of opinion. But someone may ask the question, why do we even need qiyas, brother? Isn't the Quran Sunnah sufficient? How big is the Quran? 604 pages. How many hadith are there again? How many? How many hadith sahih or da'if or? We forgot how many hadith we have reported to us. Authentic hadith, let's say. How many authentic hadith are available? Yeah, somewhere 15, 16,000 with ijtihadat, but at least 8 to 10, at the very least, to 15, maybe more thousand. Authentic hadith. So 15,000 hadith, imagine 604 ayat in the Quran, or 6,236 ayat in the Quran. That's what we have. And we have the shelves, we have buildings of books. The Sharia is going to be till Yawm al-Qiyamah. The benefit we take what the Quran spoke about is less than what it didn't speak about. What the Hadith spoke about or less than what it spoke about. The Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam didn't live it till all times. But what did he do? The Sharia comes with many, many things. The wordings of Quran and Sunnah are so sufficient in their richness and in depth that you can derive many things, many, many things. And that's the beauty of our religion, like I said. That's why qiyas is useful. Because otherwise, if everything has to be clear-cut, has an asl, how big is the Quran Sunnah going to be? Who can memorize the Quran? It's going to be 15,000 pages or something. Imagine you said that there's 100,000 ayat in the Quran. You see, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alim hakim. So the idea is that short in number, but depth is tremendous. Hence the ulama say the qiyas, analogy, is very necessary and it's evidence. That's the first issue. Qiyas, analogy, is an evidence. What does it mean? Majority of scholars have agreed, including the 4 madhabs, that qiyas, analogy, is an evidence. And the proof for it is in the Quran and in the Sunnah. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did use it. Sahaba and Salaf used to use it. And the only group that really differ with it in the past, and some scholars who agree with them, is the Zahiriyya. Ibn Hazm Zahiri and those in Zahiri madhab. And the reason when we say that they differed over it, we have to be careful and say that they didn't, it's not like they didn't agree that there's such thing. They looked at its scope as being not needed. Right? They had reasons as to why they rejected it, right, in terms of its use. And it's not the only ones who did it. Some of the other scholars earlier, they had limited rules for it. But how do we know analogy is part of the Quran and Sunnah? قال الله تعالى فاعتبروا يا أولي الأبصار. Consider, reflect, O people of understanding, O people of insight. So here the ulama say, bi'tibar here, فاعتبروا, it means, and make analogy. Right? Use your analogy, use your reflection to make connections between things. Let's look at one example, one hadith, to show Prophet Muhammad ﷺ used analogy. Hadith ibn Abbas, a man came to Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam and said, Ya Rasulullah, inna ummi matat wa alayha sawmu shahri. My mother died and she had a month of fasting only on her from Ramadan. Should I make it up for her? فقال عليه الصلاة والسلام لو كان على أمك, if there was upon your mother دين, a debt, أكنت قاضيه عنها, would you pay back? He said, نعم, of course. He said, فدين الله يحق أن يقضى. that Allah's debt is more deserving to be paid. Nabi Sallallahu Bukhari Muslim. Nabi Sallallahu what's the proof? He used qiyas. Analogy of debt with money, you're going to pay it off. Debt in deen, pay it off. That's qiyas. Because he's trying to connect the two. They both are debts. Right? If you want to break it down, what did the Prophet do? He took something we all agree on. Right? When you have a debt, when you pay back, right? For a deceased, right? And Allah says, right? Before you die and you distribute the wealth, right? Right? You're supposed to pay off the debt, pay off the wasiyah, then the rest of ours. So debt for the deceased has to be paid off. How about the ibadat they're owing? Should it be paid off? Prophets use them both to show yes. Both are debts, therefore both should be paid off. Qiyas. Analogy. From here we see that Rasul did it, Sahaba did it. And the best example was the fact that the Sahaba, after the Prophet died, they used a lot of analogy. Because what happened? The Ummah expanded, right? They're going to new territories they've never seen before. So Umar, when he wrote the letter to Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, he told them, when you go over there to these places, right, to use the qiyas, right? Because he knows at the end of the day that there's so many new rulings coming. We need to use what we know from Rasulullah to develop some new rulings to new issues. So therefore, the scholars say whoever denies qiyas, analogy, this is very dangerous. But obviously, the scholars, they know that the scholars who differed on it, they didn't deny it outright. Rather, they have a different evidence to use in its place or the way to approach it. But we're not going to get into that due to the time. I want to focus on the concept of qiyas. To help us understand this, since we said consensus is very useful because it shows that the Ummah agreed, hence it makes our life easier. They all agree to something, khalas, we don't have to worry. When there is qiyas being used, analogy, what does that tell us? So some of the difference of opinion in fiqh is because of qiyas wa ta'leel. There's no clear-cut evidences or absent evidence. Hence some of the scholars had to resort to analogy. What does that tell you then? If there's qiyas being used, either there is no evidence, or the evidence is not clear, or the scholars differ over the authenticity of that evidence. Because you cannot be using qiyas unless it's a last resort. Right? So, for example, if we have clear-cut texts, we're going to go to a qiyas? No, we don't need analogy, but we have asl. But when we don't have it, or it's not that clear, or it's an evidence everyone differ over, or very weak, then some scholars will go for qiyas, and some would say we will not. The benefit we're going to take from this one, when you think about difference of opinion in fiqh, one of the things a student has to understand if you're going to study fiqh, sabab ikhtilaf, why ulama are differing. And some of the ulama have listed all the reasons for difference of opinion in fiqh. And one of the reasons is due to qiyas, analogy. To help us understand this, the scholars, they say that when there is qiyas being used, analogy is being used amongst the scholars when there is an absence of evidence, or the evidence in which we're looking at is not, right, for the issue at hand, is not clearly in the Quran and Sunnah. Or maybe sometimes even that we don't have like evidence which is authentic. So scholars, when they talked about qiyas and analogy, they said that the reason why even analogy can cause difference of opinion, scholars differed on whether to use it or not. Right, that's one, right? Whether to use the analogy or not. Number two, what is the similarity between two things that we're analyzing? For qiyas, there's something between the two things similar. For example, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said that the debt you pay for money and the debt you have to pay back for Allah, and when you have active worship owing. He found a similarity. Both of them are debts. Both of them are things owing. So sometimes scholars differ on what's the reason for the analogy. Some of them they differ sometimes on, right, on the fact that analogy should be used at all, or if we're going to be using analogy, what type of analogy. So some of the fiqh that we know today, that we look at today, difference of opinion, goes back to difference of opinion on qiyas. The reason why this is useful, if you study qiyas properly, you could weigh up which analogy is valid, which is invalid, which is acceptable, which is not. But our job is not that right now. Right now our job is to understand, if you're going to do qiyas, analogy, what do you need? And we'll finish with this for today. 4 things are needed for qiyas to be established. 4 things. These are the ingredients of analogy. They're easy to see them, difficult in the application. Number 1, you need an asl, an origin. In other words, you need a clear-cut ruling to begin with. Okay, so let's use the example of khamr, alcohol. alcohol or intoxicants are prohibited, like beer and wine. But Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's time, there's no marijuana, right? When did marijuana become out to the Ummah? Around the 7th century, right? Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah's time, and it came from the Muslim country, so we're well familiar with hashish, right, and cannabis. So it became prohibited ijma'an at that time. I know today some people have ikhtilaf, I don't know what ikhtilaf they're on, right? Ijma' when it first came, right? Some people, they have to get out of that time period, right? But today it's ijma' ummah, right? So marijuana is not in the Quran and Sunnah, right? Let's use this example. First, we need an asl, origin. Where is the origin? We need either ayah in the Quran, or clear hadith, or a consensus that something's haram or halal or whatever. Let's use alcohol. Alcohol, Quran says it's haram, hadith says it's haram, ijma' ummah says it's haram. If you want to know something's haram, if you have all three levels of evidences, that's clearly haram, right? Or clearly something ruling is done. Quran, Sunnah, ijma'. And many ulama do it on purpose to mention these three types of evidences to give confidence to a ruling. Quran, Sunnah, ijma'. So alcohol is prohibited by Quran, Sunnah, and ijma'. So what do we have? Initial ruling, al-asl. We'll start with the original ruling. What's the ruling of alcohol? Prohibited. Okay, put that there. Second ingredient, we need the new issue. The ulama called it the fara', the subsidiary issue, the new issue we're dealing with. The fara' just means, what's this new thing which you're applying the old ruling to? In our situation, we're examining, it's marijuana, right? Hashish, cannabis. We're going to analyze it. This is called a fara'. Fara' means something which it's no textual evidence for it. Hence why we're trying to do the qiyas. We're trying to do the analogy because we don't have anything clear on it. Because this is why people ask you, right? Where in the Quran and Sunnah, someone's going to ask you, is marijuana prohibited? See, you have to explain to him, okay, we're going to first establish to you there's something called qiyas. Because if we don't do that, what's going to happen? He thinks everything's tasrih, nas, miskeen. That's a lot of awam, that's what they think. Everything's in the Quran clearly. Where is the hijab in the Quran? Like, what was he looking for? The word hijab only? It's in the Quran. But he sees jilbab, he missed that one. He didn't know what jilbab is. That's where we're going today, right? He said, where is the hijab? Ayat al-Nur, he didn't read that. Well, Ayat al-Ahzab, because he's looking for the word hijab. We have to teach awam. I told you before, literalism is a problem in awam. Because the lay people, right? They don't know that there's other rulings. So we have to explain to them something called qiyas. So we're going to say there's no clear evidence for marijuana in terms of its wording. Although some of the scholars do try to bring some wordings that are close to describing it, but there is nothing clearly. So that's the first condition. It's not textual. Second condition we're going to need to make sure that we can analyze this thing is that it has similarities to the origin. It must share some similarities to the original ruling. That's the second. The illah, that's what they call the illah. The illah is cause, juristic reason. You have to have the same shared illah, same similarities. And when I say similarity, I'm not talking about form and like. I'm talking about they share the same cause for prohibition or cause of ruling. Illah doesn't mean that they look the same. No. We're looking at what made alcohol prohibited again? Anyone knows? What's alcohol prohibited? Intoxication. What's marijuana do? Intoxication. Illah. There we go. You got it. That's the illah. They share the same reason for the ruling. So marijuana is not in the Quran and Sunnah, but marijuana intoxicates. Alcohol is prohibited because alcohol intoxicates. Original ruling, alcohol is prohibited. I'm going to make qiyas marijuana. I'm going to move it over. How can I move it over? Condition one, there's no text for marijuana. Number two, they share the same illah. This is where a lot of different opinion comes. Why? Because they talk of war sometimes. What is the cause for prohibition? Some scholars say, I don't see the qiyas. Some say qiyas wrong, right? So they can differ. In marijuana, it's very clear. Because what did Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam tell us? مَا أَسْكَرَ كَثِيرُهُ فَقَلِيلُهُ حَرَامٌ كُلُّ مُسْكِرٌ haram. He made it clear. So all we do is that, what is this thing? Intoxicates? Alcohol intoxicates? Boom. See, that's why Islam is the only religion has a war on drugs. Right? We prohibited every drug categorically since the 7th century. Every single one you can imagine. Every other religion, you're going to just see them keep making new edicts, new verdicts. Islam, we fought against this a long time ago. So when someone comes today and says there's a new drug, all we got to ask, what does it do? Right? Is it this one? Is it this way? Does it go that way? So we don't need to know how, we don't need to go taste it, right? Some people today say, we got to find out. No. Just, we found out, someone died, someone's high, khalas, right? Because sometimes what happens today, someone says, how do you know? So, okay, come on, we're looking at the illah, we're not talking at the other thing, we're not doing another chemistry. But let's say today someone did say that thing doesn't intoxicate. Okay, that's a big deal if someone said that. But the benefit we take from it, once the illah is there, then we're on the track now. Third thing we need, the hukum, the ruling. That's the third thing. So we need the ruling for the first thing. Alcohol, what was his ruling? Haram. So we got the ruling, so it's clear. And the fourth thing is the illah we talked about. We need the illah, and we already have it. So at the end, it's only four things. Asl, the origin. That's the original ruling, right? The original thing you're looking at. Number two, the new thing you're looking at, the fara', the new issue at hand. Number three, the illah, the cause that makes them both similar. And four, the ruling. If all of them line up, the ruling is established. For what? The new thing. So alcohol, prohibited. So we're going to start alcohol, and then we have marijuana. The illah is iskar, intoxication. The ruling is alcohol is haram, hence marijuana is haram. It's like kind of like a series. Like some scholars say you can make it into simple premises. Alcohol intoxicates, marijuana intoxicates. They both have the same ruling or causation of intoxicate, or both have the same illah to intoxicate. Hence the ruling is marijuana is prohibited. Khalas. That's qiyas sahih. Qiyas sahih, valid. When does qiyas become invalid? When one of these four things is off. Right? So for example, we may not agree on the causation, the illah, the cause, juristic reasoning. So qiyas, as simple as it is, where is the difficulty? In applying it. And the real difficulty can be in figuring out what is the illah for rulings. That's where the real discussion is. Sometimes it's very difficult, and ulama say in that way, a person studying Usul of Fiqh, what he will learn how to figure out the illah. He will learn, for example, what is something a valid cause, what it's not. All of this. And we'll just give one example to help solidify the basics that we just talked about. And before continuing, the scholars, once they established that the validity of analogy, qiyas, they said that qiyas, since it is a valid form of evidence, it also has types. And these types are in relation to how you reached it. But for our benefit, and to make it simple for us, we're only going to rely upon the one we just talked about. The one we talked about is called qiyasul illah. Qiyas of finding the reason for prohibition. That's the most easiest or most common one of the qiyas you can find. Qiyas al-illah. And essentially what we did, you just look for the four things and you get the ruling. Of course, there's different types of qiyas. There's different ways of using it. So when the scholars even resort to qiyas, what do you and I learn from this? Number one, it's a room for difference of opinion. If someone is telling me there's a qiyas being used by a group of scholars, immediately signals to my head, this is an issue where there's khilaf bi ahl ilm. Because why would they resort to this unless there is something not clear on the topic, or is something new, or something where the scholars couldn't find clear difference. It also allows us to learn to take it easy if there's a difference of the scholars is strong or weak. You can look into it, but when sometimes we're fighting over a tooth and nail on something which is not that strong of a argument. If you're making qiyas, means you're in an area where the scholars couldn't find something clear. Or sometimes me and you might do, because we don't know there's such things, we might be so strong to something, forgetting that it's a legitimate difference of opinion. Legitimate, right? Let's give one example, and we'll finish. Because this teaches you benefit. When you want to know when the scholars differ, always ask where and why. When you find out, then you know what your position should be. For example, we said, putting your hands on the chest or not, the difference of opinion comes because the evidence on it, the hadith, all of them have some type of weakness. So once you understand that all have some type of weakness, now the ijtihad's going on. But some people are going to think that taping your hands underneath your chest or on your chest is no difference of opinion. Ya Shaykh, why do you think Imam Ahmed said otherwise? We have to sometimes bring down the tone of some issues. When it comes to aqeedah though, as someone's going qiyas, then you gotta turn up. Say, where are you going there? And why and how? But today you find some fiqh issues which are open door, and some people are like, no, this is absolutely wrong. That's an example. Making tawaf, is wudu a shart or not? Making tawaf around the Kaaba, is wudu a shart or not? Now if you look at the ulama past and present, jumhur ulama, or we say these three are the four madhabs, they say that it's a condition. Abu Hanifa and others, they say it's not, right? Especially if someone doesn't have wudu. Where's the difference? Based on qiyas. Now the reason I'm saying that, some ulama in Saudi, they hold the view it's not a shart. So if you broke your wudu by tawaf, keep going. It's not a shart. Now some people are shocked. SubhanAllah, I never heard that. That's the point. You have to first say, if you heard a different opinion, The first question you're going to ask, well, why is it differing? Is there a hadith on it? There is. But some scholars differ on the hadith authenticity. That's one. Because again, why do you go with qiyas? Does that, see, that's another thing we can learn. If there's a difference of opinion, Imam al-Nas, Imam al-Hadith, how is that? So that's also a signal that if another opinion exists in the hadith, why is there a difference of opinion? Because the hadith maybe is difference of opinion. That's first thing. And the second thing is that they differ on their relationship and an analogy between salah and tawaf. Is tawaf salah or not? Condition of wudu of salah is wudu. So some hadith say that tawaf is like salah. So wudu has, you do qiyas, right? Wudu has shart. To make salah, you need wudu. Tawaf, therefore you need wudu. Therefore it's a condition, it's a condition. The group of scholars say, well, the hadith has some weakness, firstly. And secondly, I don't see the analogy. Because tawaf, I can talk. Salah, you can't. I see, they got to get you there. Salah is it salah? You can talk it all day. You can stop in the middle of it. Right? Did you pray another salah? You can do something. So they differ on that. So the reason why this is helpful, even though this is a regular issue of difference of opinion, when someone now knows why they differed, what you and I are going to be discussing then is, I want to figure out if their qiyas is valid or not. That's the scholarly discussion. For us, all we have to know is, well, why did they differ? Then someone will say they differ on the authenticity of the hadith. Okay. They differed on whether or not this can be analogized with salah. Now, me as a student will be like, okay, I'm following the discussion. Okay, I get it, the qiyas, and I get the ikhtilaf in hadith. But if a person who doesn't know, he look at the issue, he might just say 3 out of 4 madhab, say you need wudu, I'm going to have wudu. That's definitely safer, right? But khuruj bin khilaf doesn't always mean wajib, right? Some people, they have different views. So now we can learn that the benefit of knowing what qiyas is allows us to understand why they even went there. One more example, right? We'll make an easy example. Let's see here. Scholars, they differed. Okay, then we'll skip this one because it's not to do with the discussion we have. I'll just give one more example and we'll finish, inshallah ta'ala. Okay, wiping over cotton socks. Mas'ala jawrabayn, right? The cotton socks, not the leather socks. As we know, right, majority of the scholars, they're of the view that the cotton socks, you can't wipe on them. Right, that's the majority view, adam jawaz. Because they see that the cotton socks are not the hadith. The hadith talks about leather socks, khuf. Right? We all know what khuf is, a leather sock, right? The cotton socks is the one we wear. So Malik, Shafi'i and Abu Hanifa, they are the view that you can't. Imam Ahmed, Sufyan al-Thawri, and Abu Hanifa's 2 companions, they're all of the view that, right, you can wipe over the cotton socks. Why did they differ? Qiyas. Where is the difference of opinion? First, is there a hadith about leather socks or cotton socks? There is, but again, scholars, they differ. Right? The more correct view is that the hadith is sahih. If you say the hadith is sahih, you already finished discussion. Right? You don't have to go qiyas, right? And not qiyas, khalas. But the other group of scholars, they don't see there as a hadith. So what did they do? They said, let's make a qiyas. So the qiyas is a leather sock versus a cotton sock. Are they the same? So me and you were like, yeah, they're the same. Right? The other group of scholars says, no, they're not the same, because they say that the leather socks, you use them for travel. Hence, the reason why Nabi mentioned khuf, the leather socks, because you're going to travel with them, or you're going to use them, or they have a different quality, or they're stronger, so they brought other reasons for why this ruling applies to it. Usually when you travel, you wear leather socks. That was the condition. But they said that the real thing is that the hadith only said khuf. As for the other socks, then they can have holes. They're not strong. They might not even cover the whole area. So they differ on the similarities. They didn't see the similarities. The other group of scholars who said it aloud, they say we have number 1, we have a hadith. And number 2, leather socks are just like cotton socks. Very little difference. Why? What's the reason why we wear socks? What's the point of wearing leather socks? When you're traveling or when it's cold, it gives you warmth. What else is it supposed to do? Protection. You can walk on it. All those benefits are afforded to the cotton sock. So whatever the leather sock can do, the cotton sock can do. So there's a qiyas even if you go with that. But now you can see the benefit. When you hear something's qiyas, it can allow you to better appreciate the discussion. Why? Because you can see where to discuss or analyze. But if someone doesn't know what qiyas is or doesn't know how it works, then many of the rulings in Islam they cannot appreciate. Or worse, as I said, many lay people, they don't even know, right, that qiyas even exists. Until some of the ulama said, not all of them, but some of them, right, they mentioned that many of the ahkam of sharia, if not most of them, because especially in the latter times, are based on qiyas. That's some of the scholars, they view that most of the rulings, especially with the passing of time, are based on qiyas. Because if you look at many of the issues that me and you may study in a book of fiqh, you can't really find a clear hadith eye on it. So we're going to benefit from that. We need to know qiyas, at least it's an evidence for those purposes. Well, inshallah, we end with this much. And again, there's more details, but we got the gist of that usage. Next, we will look at all the list of the ones where the scholars differed over. Because those ones, the ones the scholars differ over, are easier to understand. Proof, not proof. Right? It's kind of like that. And then what we'll do is we're going to move on to the other aspect of the Usul of Fiqh, which is how does the Quran and Sunnah and all the evidences we have, how do we even reach the conclusions of ijma', of wajib or mustahab? These are the ones that are very important. And every time you learn something, it adds a layer to your understanding. I know some of us look like maybe we're tired, wallahu alam, but it's okay. What you're learning will allow you to later benefit because you build on it, you build. And what you do is you review. Even when we finish, we said Usul, you read it, you just keep reading over it. If you understand what these chapters are about, generally you can see later on the application. Because in the books of fiqh, or a discussion of difference of opinion, or a Q&A, you can follow what the scholar is saying because you understand the terminology, but also how things work. And later we're going to show you, inshallah, a map of all of this, put together, all of it at once. Like put together and everything, inshallah ta'ala. So we will see it easier. And we have any quick questions? Inshallah. Anybody? Yes. Yes, there are books that compile ijma', many of them. Ibn Mundir, for example, Hazm, many others. Right? Some of the contemporary scholars, there's a big book, Jami'a fi Masail ijma'. Shaykh gathered all ijma' that was claimed and with evidence for it. Big books like this. But because there's lots of difference of opinion, or sometimes in the books of fiqh, the ulama will tell you this issue is ijma' and they'll tell you who said it and who declared it, or a difference of opinion. And there are books also with difference of opinion. Today everything's made, mashallah, easy for us to find. So you can return to it. There's even some books, ijma'at fil aqidah. Everything the ulama has sunnah jama'ah agreed to, from the past and the present, so that makes it easier. Which is most of aqidah, right? So that's beautiful to know, because if you know consensus, like you someone to delete, ijma', that's it. I don't need to tell you anything else. I don't need to bring delete. If I tell you ijma', that's it. You have to walk, right? Because I don't have to bring evidence. Ijma' ummah. But imagine the problem though may come if someone doesn't know what ijma' is, and you might have to explain to him and break it down for him. So any other questions? Yes, brother. So that's the thing. He's right. The brother's asking, sometimes ijma' comes later on, right? So if ijma' is declared, then at the end of the day it's considered hujjah. And that's why we have to understand that the consensus cannot be broken once it's been made. But now if there's a difference of opinion amongst the scholars for a whole generation, and then later they made ijma' on one view, can that be considered an ijma'? Some scholars, they say yes, some say that it needs more details. But usually what might happen is that sometimes there is a difference of opinion that was before, but not so popular. Then a consensus was called despite that difference. That's a very tricky area in fiqh. Because it's possible that the scholars who claimed it's a consensus didn't know that it was actually an early difference. So that's one of the areas that are up for really big research. But the one that most scholars talk about is when an ijma' was called, and then a later scholar comes and tries to break the ijma'. Is it possible? It's not possible. Ijma' cannot be abrogated. Cannot. As Imam Ghazali mentions, rahimahullah, and others, you cannot. Because ijma' is a khabar, it's a report. Reports cannot be abrogated. And as we studied later, abrogation only applies to ahkam. So the example would be in today's time, people are coming today and saying, khuruj al-hakim al-fajr, or like the unrighteous, upright ruler. There's no ijma' of salaf that you can about opposing him or to make khuruj, rebelling against him. We talk about ijma' sahaba, right? And if someone say, okay, what is ijma'? It's very important. What do you mean? Ijma' salaf, there's been declared, especially in the latter. And wherever the ijma' is called, because some will differ over what time the ijma' is called. Let's say it was latter. Fine. And Karami, for example, Harb, Karimani, and others, they declared ijma'. Muhammad, Razi, others. Okay, so there's an ijma'. Then comes generations later, and someone says there's different opinion. Can the ijma' be nullified? It can't be abrogated. So that's the first problem we find today. That latter scholars, like 3rd, 4th century scholars, cannot go against the ijma' that's already been declared. Because we said when the ijma' is declared and is established, whatever type of ijma' we're talking, khalas. But today what's happening is today people are thinking, oh, it's not ijma', they're bringing these kinds of things. Oh, there was a difference opinion before. طيب, and then the ijma' was called, and the ijma' cannot be abrogated. And that shows you again why these conversations are very useful. Because they actually go back to Usul al-Fiqh. Because what really the conversation people differ over is like, oh, is there ijma' or not? I don't know, I don't get it. There was an ijma' called, yes. The question should be, can a 4th century scholar oppose ijma'? Where in Usul al-Fiqh that is there? That you can abrogate ijma'. Ijma' doesn't apply to akhbar, it applies to ahkam, Shaykh. Right? Ahkam, halal, haram, something's wajib now or not wajib again, not sidq. Remember, akhbar means truthful, not truthful. So that's one of the things that we can benefit. When ijma' is called, that's it. If it's established, once it's established, that's it. As for the ijma' regarding one of the two opinions and stuff like this, there are other details like that. But the good thing though is that why consensus is useful. It's like if I ask you for a proof and all you remember is ijma'. For example, someone tells you, smoking, or let's not smoke, just use khamr, alcohol, or zina is not haram. And you forgot the ayah, you forgot the hadith. We're going to call just ijma'. That's it. That's the usefulness of it. But today, somebody doesn't understand that these evidences, what they might be doing, as you said before, they're looking for explicit, or they might be going there. So that's why the scholars give us these rules. And inshallah, it will become useful more later. Because Ahlul Ilm usually, when they discuss issues, the reason why there is a difference of opinion often is because there is no ijma'. Hence, it's ijtihadi. There is no, okay, it's another benefit, last benefit on this topic. Ijtihad can only exist with two conditions. And the scholars mentioned ijtihad. Ijtihad can exist when there's no evidence, or nas. Nas is definitive, clear-cut evidence, and no ijma'. That's the room for ijtihad. Always remember that. Ijtihad is an open door. Ijtihad has conditions. Number one, no nas. Nas is, we're going to see later what nas means. Clear-cut evidence. Allah said 5 salah, someone said it could be 6. Nas. No, we're not going there. That's not allowed for someone to come and say it could be 6 salah. Right? Again, like this nas, clear, 5. 5 is nas, definitive. Second, ijma', clear ijma'. The reason why this is useful, because some people come and say, I'm going to do ijtihad. Anyone who's taking to ijtihad, remember nas, well, ijma', it's lost his mind, right? Ijtihad is when there isn't those things. So why am I saying this? When we finish these discussions, you're going to learn later, the areas where the biggest difference of opinion are, is because there's no definitive text, because there's no ijma'. Now you can understand the category, because if we reach that level of certainty, a clarity, why would anyone differ? Right? So that's one of the benefits. But some people, I believe, they need to go back and read those things because they try to confuse the people. And this is one of the confusions that they make, right? Oh, you can ijma', you don't have to take it, or if someone came after, the era is finished. Right? The ijma' is made, can't be abrogated. Any last questions? Yes. Difference of opinion is valuable for the ummah between ulama, because the ulama, when they differ on something, it's usually issues which are number one, subsidiary, furu'ina usuli. Sharia, we don't differ on the foundational issues. That one we have to have ijma'. And because Allah says, فَإِنْ آمَنُوا بِمِثْلِ مَا آمَنْتُمْ بِهِ فَقَدْ اهْتَدَوْا. If you believe the way the Sahaba believe, you're guided. You need to follow their way. Because that differing usul creates ikhtilaf, wal-khilaf, wal-iftiraq. It creates division of the mind, body, and space. Iftiraq is sect splintering. Wal-ikhtilaf is differing. We're talking khilaf. Khilaf is when where animosity is now created. So imagine today I say the Quran has this many ayat, you said that many. Okay, some ulama different how to count them. Imagine you say I have a whole surah, you don't have. Shaykh, I can't break salat together. This is something going wrong here. We're that level. Between us and the kafir is that. They differ about the Quran and Sunnah. We differ on the understanding of the Quran and Sunnah, as Ibn Qayyim said. Ahl Sunnah, Jama'ah, and Muslim, we differ about the meaning of the Quran and Sunnah, not on the Quran and Sunnah. Next benefit, the اختلاف العقول. Allah knows mankind difference. ولا يزالون مختلفين. People are always going to differ. So the ulama, the difference عقول. عوام اختلاف القلوب. That's how we are. We differ something, we're fighting each other. That's, they always check the history. Every madhab is fighting. Not ulama not fighting. It's always awam. Shafi'i, Hanbali. If you go to Tariq, you see that it's like a war. Right? It's going on. But this is awam, lay people. اختلاف العقول means Allah knows. Some ulama, when they analyze things, they're going to have different viewpoints. So Allah made it easy for us because some ulama say the ulama didn't differ on the subsidiary issues. We're all done for. Imagine we all agree there's no ikhtilaf. We're done. Some of us are da'if. We need to take a weaker view or we might take a different view for whatever reason. Thirdly, we know that these issues, the best generations differed over them. They never differ on the aqidah, they differ on these. Hence showing us the fact that these areas account for what? Differences in the spread of Islam as well in different countries. So an example would be some of the viewpoints that spread in different countries, they differed, scholars differed, and then it created laxity or ease for some cultures versus others. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows, Alim Hakim, some countries, they have a different viewpoint. Okay, if it fit in that society, it's ikhtilaf, it makes it easier. So for example, we can see certain fiqh views, because the difference of opinion was legitimate, it spread in some area and it benefited them. And sometimes we can see that they also allow us the leeway within the sharia. But the problem is when you have exploited the ikhtilaf by creating all kinds of ikhtilaf that don't exist, or claiming everything is ikhtilaf, or ikhtilaf is hujjah. It's not a hujjah. Ikhtilaf is not hujjah by itself. What it is, it allows someone to know that the scholars differed and not sinful or liable if I follow one side of this view. But my job is to investigate, ask trustworthy scholars I trust. But let's say I take one of the views, I'm not liable. But imagine if it's only one opinion. It's very difficult. So that's one of the beauty of the ikhtilaf. The problem we have today, though, Allahu A'lam, some people, because of this, they find anxiety when they hear difference of opinion. Yeah, Shaykh, difference between politics and dunya, kuffar are different, sports are different. Why you don't get anxiety with that? Right? How many groups we have? You don't get anxiety there. A deen, you get anxiety. Come on, this is wrong. Some people, you tell them it's wrong. Did you see the Ummah's one political party, one sports team? We didn't have that, but in deen, you have to be one madhab. This is also wrong. Shows us again, sometimes what we're missing is a greater wisdom. Some ulama have proven, it's amazing research, that the difference of opinion, even in the sects of Islam, is a sign of Islam's truth. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, with 73 sects, is a proof of Islam. Why? Because the fact that he not only told us about it, it proves the validity of Islam, the fact that such emergence can even occur, but within our parameters. With the Christian Jews, they can't solve those issues. We can. They don't even have any harmonizing mechanism. They're just sitting around like, we're all Christians. No, us, we can say who's right or wrong. They can't. So we'll see later that the difference of opinion should not make someone anxious. You have to calm down and say, mashallah. The question should be, how did they differ? Right? Not like, they're differing. And also because some people, they forget, if you're a lay person, what's your job anyways? Right? Their job is to go investigate. If you're talib ilm and stuff, you're gonna study it. And that's why we need to know difference of opinion, so that we can share with the people when there is a legitimate view. Barakallahu feekum. Subhanak bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.